Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh. Draenor hasn't actually got to the point yet where it's a single-player game. We haven't quite progressed that far down the slippery slope. But I did want to talk about vanilla, and one of the reasons it really brings it to mind is that the less and less vanilla players are still into the game. I mean, it's been out 11 years now, and naturally people have drifted off. I don't know what happened when vanilla came out. Everybody had so much free time. I raided 6-7 nights a week. It was insane. I mean, I'd lead 2 or 3 Molten Core and Blackwing Lair raids to start with, and then do some Anchorage and some Guttab raids when they come out. I mean, now I can barely find time to raid 4 nights a week with kids and jobs, and I'm guessing I'm not the only player that's happened to, and that's why a lot of players have drifted off, and we see the newer players coming in, the younger player base, and I'm not against that. That's not an insult in any way to the younger players, but some people didn't come into Lich King or Cataclysm, and that's fine, but they missed out on vanilla. But what was vanilla really like? And that's what I want to have a look at in this, what is planned to be a series of videos. My voice is on the wane at the moment, so it might be a bit of a delay until the rest of them come out. And for anybody who did play vanilla, they will be familiar with this video sequence, in that trying to find tanks or healers or just groups in general was an absolute nightmare. Never mind good ones. I mean, now people moan about the lack of good players. Back in vanilla, it was an absolute nightmare. Trying to find a good tank and a good healer to go to somewhere like Scholomance or Stratum or anywhere that your tier sets dropped, which took so much effort to get. It was insane. I mean, you could spend hours sat in Ironforge on a ledge or outside a bank or wherever your guild tended to congregate, just looking for these groups. And I mean, that is just a spoof sequence I've created. That's not a real one. That's why I'm just saying it rather than using the general chat, because no looking for group in them days. Anyway, this is actually what you were presented with when you first logged into the game. Absolutely fantastic, as you can tell. What you're going to remember is when World of Warcraft were released, MMOs were still relatively new. They had been out before. The first generation had been on the market. But with the release of World of Warcraft and I think EverQuest 2, which were produced by Sony, if I remember correctly, this was really second generation and blew it out into the market. Everybody playing it. Men, women, young, old. It got a real cross-section of society. And for somebody that's just logging onto it, I mean, it was my real first experience of MMOs. This is a really useful screen. I mean, it's very simple in terms of you got Alliance and Horde, and that was a real big divide. I mean, these days, it doesn't really tend to make much difference. A lot of people have Alliance and Horde characters, but I know when I started playing, I only played Alliance. I wouldn't even look at the Horde. And my friend would only play Horde. He was like, no, I don't want to play Alliance. Well, why don't you play with me? Come over. He's like, well, why don't you play on Horde? And we didn't fall out, but in games term, we wouldn't speak. I mean, there were no Battle.net even in the day. And it was really bizarre. It really drove the player base apart in some ways. But then when you look back at that again, it's probably because a lot of people did come from Warcraft 3. Now, if anybody hasn't played Warcraft 3, I would definitely recommend going and playing it, because it's an absolutely fantastic game. It's a real-time strategy, rather than MMO, but it sets the scene for the Third War, the Rise of the Lich King, things like that, before Warcraft comes out. World of Warcraft comes out, or did originally. And, I mean, the classes were quite simple. You had your little blurb about Alliance and Horde, and you had quite a limited selection of classes as well available to each race. Nowadays, it's a lot broader. If you really want to play a certain race and a certain class, chances are if that's not available, then there will be another one to appeal to you. But back in the day, if you wanted to play a Paladin, you had to play Alliance, and if you wanted to play a Shaman, you had to play Horde. And after Warcraft 3, where a lot of people tended to gravitate towards Uther, and the Paladins, or Thrall and the Shamans, that could be a real deciding factor. That's why I actually picked Alliance, because I wanted to play a Paladin off Uther's legacy. I won't spoil it for what happens in Warcraft 3 if you don't know. But yes, very, very interesting times. But basically, this lied to us, did this. This was an absolute lie. Because in terms of the Paladin, it talks about him being a great warrior, able to bolster allies and fight in the front ranks. And anybody who played a Paladin in Vanilla WoW will understand you could do none of this. It was an absolute nightmare. The only thing you had in terms of offensive ability was Judgment, and you had to activate a seal to then judge it, which then consumed the seal. Later on in the game, you did get things like Consecration, which is a static AoE, absolutely horrendous for DPS, and you got things like Exorcism, which only could be used on Undead. You couldn't even use it on Forsaken. You could in the beta, I believe, and you could in the very, very early days of Vanilla, but actually after a few patches, that was ruled out. So for realistic terms, you could use it in the Plague Lands. So it did actually make questing through the Plaguelands, very, very efficient, and you'll see a lot of paladins in the Plaguelands for that sole reason. But the blurb lied, and it's a real shame, because now all classes can do what they say they can. If you play Paladin now, you can tank, heal, or DPS on it efficiently. If you play a Druid, that's the same. If you play a Rogue, I mean, Rogues have always been DPS, but it gives you a little bit more of an insight into what their capabilities are. And that pretty much sums up vanilla WoW in a nutshell, is confusion. Nobody really knew what they were doing. I mean, the endgame content would change that. But you had warriors who would level thinking they were going to be a mighty warrior, wielding 2 one-handed weapons or a massive weapon and wading through their enemies. They hit level cap, and the guild turns around and goes, right, that's cool, we need a warrior to raid with us. Here's your shield, here's your one-hander, go and tank. As a paladin, no, you can't use that two-handed mace. Here's your shield, here's your mace, go and heal. And so on and so forth. You had one specialisation. If you were a rogue, you did damage. If you were a warlock, you did damage. But if you were a hybrid class, no, you'd had one role. And like I've already explained, it is a little bit of a shame. But when you look back at it now, if you think this is the first MMO you've ever logged on, this is quite an epic sequence. Back in 2004, these graphics were good on such a scale. I'm not going to say they were the highest end graphics on the market, because they weren't. They were better looking games. Those games were linear, and they were small in terms of their world. World of Warcraft was massive. And even now, it still amazes me that back in the day when it was released, I looked at it and thought, this is fantastic, because I can run from Stranglethorn Vale to the very, very top of the Plaguelands above Stratholme, where there were some high elves chilling out that have escaped the war. And I didn't have to go through one loading screen. I could just go the entire distance, just running. And that was brilliant. I mean, especially when I'd been playing games like Resident Evil, and every time I walked through a door, I had to have a loading screen of a door. Not even a background, just a door. And all of a sudden, I'm in this massive open world where I've got no loading screens. A real difference. But it was clunky. I mean, if you've been watching the video, you will notice that the quest giver has no mark on my map. It's got the exclamation mark like they still do nowadays, but it's not visible on my map. When you put this into the context that quests were far and few between in vanilla, there weren't enough to get you to the next zone. If you do all the ones in Elwyn and do nothing else, you will not be high enough level to get to Westfall. In Westfall, you need to be level 14, 15 realistically to fight the mobs. Yeah, do all the quests, you will get to level 12, maybe 13 if you're rested on a few mobs, things like that. So you had to go grinding, and in reality the quests were grinding. If you're watching the video, you will notice that I've got to get boar meat, and wolf meat, and all I do is kill wolves, auto-attack them, because that's the only ability I've got at this level. I have to activate my seal every 20 or 30 seconds, but that's it then. Just auto-attack, and kill the wolves until they drop their tough wolf meat. And it's setting me up. That's set the tone of the game. And that carries on. I mean, there are parts on some in some zones. I think Stranglethorn Vale was probably the worst. We always used to call it the character killer, because characters went into Stranglethorn Vale and it was such a laborious process to get back out. So I think you went in level 30, 32 and came out at level 40 plus, because I know you got your mount while you were in there, not accessible until level 40 in the old game. And people just got so bored of it, they just couldn't face it anymore. And especially if they already had a character beyond that, they'd just log them and level them or play them. They would turn around and go, no, I can't do Stranglethorn again. And even the quests were so dull and repetitive. If you look up the old Green Hills of Stranglethorn quest, there's got to be things online about it. The all Stranglethorn general chat was looking for this page, we'll trade for these pages. I think you needed 24 of them, maybe more, and there were 2 or 3 that just seemed impossibly hard to get. And so characters went to Stranglethorn to die. And we always said if you got it by there, chances are you would get it to 60. But just huge pieces of grinding, and it was a real shame because everything was so intense in terms of skills and time dedication. If, for example, you have been paying attention, you'll have noticed that I've got 2-handed mace skills, and I will probably keep with this until I get to level 30, 35. And that's because quests were designed to give you loot based on where you will start. So as a human, for example, I start in Elwyn, I start in Northshire, and I'll go into Elwyn, and I'll go to Westfall and Redridge and Darkshire, places like that, where the most of the human characters will go. And the loot will always be set for what classes are available to them humans. So you'll have 2-handed weapons for warriors and paladins, staves for wizards, priests and warlocks, and maybe daggers for rogues. No hunters, no shamans, anything like that. So you won't have bows or guns which makes it very difficult if you decide to create a dwarf hunter and come down to Stormwind to level with one of your friends, because none of the loot will be really applicable to you. There might be the odd piece, like the tunic, the Defiance tunic or the Westfall tunic, which you get from doing the Dead Mines, which might really work well for your hunter, and there might be some loot drops from instances which tend to be more random or more generic because people have to come from all over the place. But in terms of actual quest rewards, you will have very, very little, no rewards that are applicable for your class. Once you get out in the world, once you've got power level 35, and the world becomes a little bit of a smaller place then, or even 40 when you get your mount, and that really speeds things up, because it starts getting to a point where areas that are too high level for you, you can actually run by the mobs on your mount, and the chances are they won't get you, or they won't get you as often. Going through the wetlands, for example, in the low teens, which you have to do, you will just get killed by crocodiles all the way. They'll just run off the swamps and they'll just eat you. It seems a really cruel idea to put a quest like that in, but that's what they did. But like I was saying, so I'm using maces, and I'll get a sword, and my sword skill will be level 1, so I have to then go back to the low level areas and level that sword skill up really, really slowly, using my intellect. So not too bad for a paladin. You've got something like a warrior, you're going to be there a long, long time, leveling your new weapon skill up, until it becomes high enough level where I've got a reasonable chance to hit and hurt my enemies. And that's across the board. You can use guns, and this was a real problem for some hunters, especially the night elf ones, that they would have used bows and maybe crossbows that you learnt in Stormwind, but bows up until level 60, you gut a molten core and there was a schematic that dropped for a gun, and no doubt your guild would have been hoarding these bars and items in the hope of making a legendary hammer, the Sulfurus, which was never going to happen. Then this plan drops, and you think, this is brilliant. Rather than one person get a legendary, which we might not get because it is still quite intensive in terms of materials, we can probably equip all the hunters in the guild with this really, really good gun. And chances are you'll probably have ammunition for it as well, or engineers that can make plenty of ammunition from the thorium that will have been grinded, no doubt. And so you equip them all, and they've all got level 1 skill with guns, so you'll just see your guild hunters will just go out before a raid and spend 3 or 4 hours just shooting mobs for no purpose other than to get this skill up. And it just boils down to the mindset of vanilla, in it was so grinding intensive. Now, I know some games that have got a larger market in the East. I know the Final Fantasy Online games, they tend to still be a little bit like that. I personally have no idea why. I hate grinding. I think the idea of going out and just grinding something mindlessly is a bizarre way to spend your time. When I'm online, I want to do things. And this is really why I'm making these videos at the moment, is that Warlords, Draenor's fallen off a little bit. I've got a lot of free time and enjoy the game. So it's like, well, I'll have a bit of a chat about them and put them online, see what people think. But grinding is just pointless, just a time sink. And I've got limited time on the game. I don't want to spend it just mindlessly killing things. So in terms of vanilla, that was how it started. It just was this baffling experience of you being forced to choose a faction which you might have already had a inclination to. You might have already felt the lure of the Alliance because they were the good guys per se. You know, the Horde were never bad guys in my opinion. The Forsaken were an odd addition. I understand the reasoning for that because people like the faction that's a little bit more evil, but the Orcs and the Taurens were definitely not evil. They're just victims of circumstance. The Trolls were borderline. The Forsaken were out there, but the Alliance were traditionally the good guys. I don't like to use that terminology, but I think in this case it is appropriate. And then you had to choose your race and your class, and you were very limited. And then you logged in the game. You'd spend, I think the average time to level up was 20 to 30 days online. If I'm wrong, please do correct me on that. But I know my first character took quite a while, and my ults took about 15 to 20 days. I had the benefit of mounts and money at that point. And then when you got to 60, it really was a different kettle of fish. You would level as Retribution, for example, and then all of a sudden you'd be told to go Holy. The only alternative was if you leveled up in a group where you could realistically level as Holy. It was difficult, things like that. So that's it for this video. There's a few minutes left in terms of me running around this low level area in Elwind, just doing some trash mobs. I say questing, but realistically it's doing trash mobs just to try and get some generic items to hand into the awful quest givers. I am going to fish some more video out of me later on, which I want to talk about more specific things in the game, like grouping and travelling and loot, things like that. But this was just a very quick insight into the original launch of WoW and how bad it was in terms of gameplay or confusion. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.